These are not monuments. They are places where the sacred and the material were understood to interact.
Well, it looks good. Yes.
For those digging into the deeper annals of folk traditions or even occultism, they might happen across this reoccurring trope of the world pillar or the axis mundi. This is a very layered and decorated subject in comparative religion. However, there's two very distinctive ways to tend to this subject matter. Where is the center of the universe either goes to the world tree or the holy mountain. This axis mundi, or this world pillar trope, is just that, the center of the universe, the perceived place that the world is held up from. All too often, significant religious experiences are had amidst the holy mountain, or one who's seeking that spiritual enlightenment goes to the mountains. This reoccurring trope comes from somewhere. So, in order to understand the trajectory of this idea or the original meanings behind this idea, we are going to take the time to investigate these various centers of the universe, these various holy mountains, and focus on those that are the most prolific, those that are the most recognized throughout the various cultures of the world. So let's ask, what is the holy mountain? What is the axis mundi? And what is this reoccurring religious preoccupation with the world center? Across the ancient world, whether across Eurasia or the Americas, the heavens were believed to be the home of the spiritual, the mysterious, that which is of the above. Rain comes from up there, sun comes from up there, the stars gleam up there. It is of great mystery. The mountains then are that which is closest to that mystery, or that which is approaching that mystery, or meets that mystery. And so then we have the center of the universe as it pronounces itself in our environment. That is a landmarker towering above all else. There is a reoccurring motif in animistic and more folk religions that this isn't just some mountain where the gods dwell. No, that's too modern. It is of us. That is where our ancestors dwell, or that is where significant events that made our world happened. I hope that comes across. This is something that we share with our ancestors, and it is of us in the same way as it is of the environment. So then the mountain is ancestral. It is not something distinctively divine and separated from our beingness. So then the sacredness of specific mountains is distinct based off of this. It doesn't have a religious background, say for instance, Mount Olympus, Mount Sinai, but it has an ancestral spirituality that gives it this divine significance. Say, for instance, the Black Hills to the Sioux. Say, Mount Fuji to the ancient Japanese. This reoccurs throughout the world, down in New Zealand, throughout the Americas, so on. These holy mountains, or these sacred mountains, as they are a part of their earnest cultures. So then, these mountains reoccurringly are explained by their earnest cultures in their mythos, how they came to be, what their function is, and perhaps what mysteries dwell there. Reoccurringly specific monsters or mythical entities would dwell in the mountains. And so, again, reoccurringly, they are a place of great mystery, and often places that you wouldn't even dare to go. You would leave it be. You would let that mystery be a mystery, and only tales would be whispered about it. But that's just one end of this discussion. There's also the case of the ziggurat, or the artificial mountain like the pyramids. And this is when a culture moves to create that ladder to the heavens, that Jacob's ladder, so to speak, to create that mountain to reach the upper limits of the heavens or the firmament, what have you. This has a number of different historical implications, most notably the Tower of Babel. So then, if we don't have a natural marker in our environment, then we will create one that will act as this center or this podium unto the heavens. But sometimes it's less monumental than this, less monumental than building a pyramid or a ziggurat, that is. We could build various stupas, as is done in Buddhism, or we could build an artifice, a city that would act as the center. This is the Temple Mount. This is the ancient Cusco. And this is a somewhat other reoccurring trope, where the political center of the world is said to be the center of the world. If we live in a remote town and there's a big city of which is the center of all commerce in the world as we know it, then that city would be perceptibly the center of the world. And lastly, there's a reoccurring trope of where the world was initially created from, where the creation story then takes place. This is true in the ancestral lands of the Hopi. This is perhaps why the East African creator deity Mulungu is associated with Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. And lastly, the confusing case of Abrahamic religions. Now, I'll state plainly and upfront, we are going to touch on both the esoteric and the more mainstream interpretations of this throughout this session. But first, we should touch on what is considered more theologically oriented or more esoterically oriented, which is the whole case of Golgotha. Now, depending on who we're talking to, where Jesus died is the place where Adam's body is. Golgotha is the place of the skull, and this is a geological place. Where Christ dies and where Adam's body is also allegedly the place where the serpent will be crushed. There are a number of different, very, very layered subjects brought up in just these few phrases. But nonetheless, this is a intriguing example of this origin of the universe, place of creation idea. Also, we could say that the Garden of Eden is, in the same way as the Hopi ancestral lands, believed to be the place where it all was formed from, where the universe was created from. So you can already see that in the case of the Abrahamic traditions, this is very confusing and perplexing. Nonetheless, we have already spoken to a somewhat reoccurring trope of the association between the holy mountain, the place of that is the center of the universe, and the creator deity. And so with that, we should start streamlining our conversation a bit more into focus subjects, and we'll start with Mount Sinai. Now, it should be stated up front that it's still contested where exactly Mount Sinai is. This has never been directly figured out. A lot of people have a lot of very heated ideas as to where exactly this is, but it's still not decided. There are some contentious academic takes when it comes to the origin and etymology of Mount Sinai. Sinai, or sign, or sin, is previously the moon deity when it comes to the greater Mesopotamian paganism. This moon deity, as it could have had its mount, or that which would reach up towards it, being a certain mountain, or the mountain of the moon deity. The mention of this deity is particularly contentious in its relationship with Islam. The question being, why is the moon, that crescent, associated with Islam? I'm going to leave that there. Nonetheless, this is an interesting lead in the history of this area and perhaps the history of this mountain, the moon, and this mountain. Taking note of this, we could also ask, what's up with the lake of fire, as it is mentioned in the Bible? Perhaps that has something to do with this Mount Sinai or this mountain, because if you look into a volcano, it sure looks like a lake of fire. So perhaps there's an association between this mountain, the lake of fire, divinity, and fire. Horeb, after all, is etymologically meaning glowing heat, and thus the words Sinai and Horeb are associated. There are some earnest questions here about the ancient paganism, or the ancient relation to this greater area as it translated into the more contemporaneous monotheism. So where does one start to enter the other is the question here in a historical, mythological perspective. But more conventionally speaking, we know what the interpretation is. This is where the commandments are given. Go up to the mountain, receive revelation, receive the word directly from divinity. If God exists in the heavens, then the place to get nearest to God would be the mountain, and thus the function of Mount Sinai, or the holy mountain. To experience something as prolific as a theophany, or the direct experience of a deity, you would certainly have to be somewhere mysterious or somewhere sacred. This doesn't just happen casually. And thus, the presence of this special place, this sacred place nearest to the heavens, it's obvious. All the allegory is obvious here once you look at it this way. Moses goes up, receives the word from the heavens, comes down to deliver it. The word from the heavens is the Spirit, or that which ordains from the above. To get that word is likened to the ancient astrologers who would look up to the heavens to understand what we should build, when we should do it, when we should sow the seeds, so forth. The heavens tells us what to do. This is an ancient fascination. And thus, in the same way, to receive that word directly, you must ascend. But to keep to one of our focuses here, this is not necessarily an axis mundi. This is not necessarily the pillar of the world. As mentioned, this is perplexing when it comes to the Abrahamic traditions. Is it the Garden of Eden? Is it Calvary? Is it the Temple Mount? Is it Mount Sinai? It's curious because in the Bible, we do have the mention of the pillars of the earth. And so then it seems that it's saying that there's more than one and not necessarily one center pillar. But we'll tend to this in the future. For now, we're going to move on to another confusing case, and that's Mount Olympus. You might be wondering, what's confusing about this? Well, the center of the universe is the omphalos, and this is a navel, the navel of the universe, and this is at Delphi, which is where the ancient oracles were. And this is most certainly not in the same area as the Thessalian Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus, though, is where they say the 12 Olympian gods are. This is curious for several reasons. There are 12 Olympian gods, and when it comes to 12, the mind naturally goes to the constellations, the months. But the exact correlation between the 12 deities and the 12 signs of the zodiac are haphazard at best. Putting that aside, we should acknowledge then this not center of the universe motif, but still yet the place of the gods, or the highest peak. This goes back to perhaps the Neanderthals. This particular area has a substantial archaeological history. So when exactly did people start to project onto this mountain, or to say, or to have stories that the gods are up there? By the time we reach the more recognizable Greeks, thus we have the 12 Olympians. So in this, we can look for descriptions, because we all know this. We're familiar with this in the very overblown stories shared throughout the world of the Greek pantheon. But instead of reference, to look for description, and there's Homer's Iliad. And in this, it's painting a picture that is very much heavenly. Golden gates, a fortress, buildings of stone and bronze foundations surrounded by courtyards and golden pavements, council chambers, feast halls, an expansive view of all of mankind. You can see why it's strange that this isn't the center of the universe when the gods are there overlooking all of mankind. The peak of Olympus, then, served as the throne of Zeus. If the deities are of the heavens, then this is the place where they affect the world or can come to observe the world directly. Otherwise, the heavens have no tangibility. They are not practically effectual up there. Whereas here on the mount, that is the throne, you see. So this is where the gods can come to intervene. I hope this makes sense. The gods normally dwell in the aether or the upper air, that upper shining blue of the sky. That is of a very different substance and a very different being than the world state of being. Whereas to come down and to have a podium and to have a place of observation, that is the Olympian Acropolis. There's a few things to note here. The ancient Greeks said that there were never storms atop this mountain, that it was perpetually cloudless. So this is a state of bliss and also would offer a place of viewership because everything that would happen, the storms, the rain, and so forth, would be ordained from that mountain. The deities that commanded these things are orchestrating from up there. It's worthy of mentioning again, this site has a flurry of architectural discoveries, images of thunderbolts, different peaks with different burnt offerings. It is impossible to say how long, how historical this belief is. At the very least, it's observable that as far as we can say, there had been people that have been giving offerings to the deities that they believed to be up there orchestrating or orchestrating from there. So we should notice that this is an appropriation of the ancestral, I believe. Whoever was inhabiting this area prior to the influence of the Proto-Indo-European Skyfather inclusion had some sort of ancestral belief about this area. And then when that greater mythos came in, that Western influence, let's just call it, then that becomes what we now call Mount Olympus and the Pantheon and the 12 Olympians. This all gets kind of mushed together and we inherit its summation. An honorable mention here, and also to add to the former confusion noted, is Mount Athos, also located in Greece. And this is what's referred to as the Holy Mountain. And that's more its association now with Christianity. Before, it was known as the site of a battle between Poseidon and an ancient Thracian giant. So this had that, again, ancestral story, that mythic story that described why it looks the way it looks. Very animistic in its orientation. But later, this is said to be the site of where all these practitioners who were pagans converted to Christianity, and the Virgin Mary blessed the land. This is now then a holy mountain, which is the site of a substantial monastic movement. And this is another undermentioned part of this whole holy mountain story that we're painting here. The pilgrimage to the holy mountain. And if we're going to bring that up, then we have to mention Mount Kailash, or Mount Kailasa. This is holy to Buddhism and Hinduism. So Westerners can understand it as the holy mountain of the East. The etymology of the name either means crystal, or it means snow-jeweled mountain. This plays a very similar role as Mount Olympus, in that in Hinduism, Kailash is believed to be the mountain of which Shiva and his consort Parvati live with their children. Yet again, a mountain where the deities dwell. However, this mountain gets a bit more straightforward in the sense that it is believed to be the center of the world. This has to do with its assimilation with the mythic Mount Meru. This is seen frequently in Buddhist mandalas. This Mount Meru as it is cosmologically the center of the universe, or at the very least the center of the earth. Eventually, Mount Meru is associated with Mount Kalish. They become one and the same. What was once mythical gets an actual embodiment in this mountain. But it's not just the mountain alone, it's also the Lake Mansarovar. This is the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. Like the Shiva Lingam, it's displaying both. The mountain is this yang, this generative power as it juts upward into the sky. And the lake is the yin, the receptive power, the goddess. You see, this yin-yang, or this duality nod, as it is evocative of Eastern religions, is embodied by these geological markers, these geographical markers. And so in this, you see that this is more of that animistic drive again, where nature is displaying something of a religious or ancestral quality. But it certainly gets this Eastern philosophical twang about it. For instance, this lake, Manasarovar. Manas means mind, and then Sarovar means lake. So this lake of the mind, or the perception, the intellect, the conscious. So on one hand, you have this yin, goddess, lake, and then on the other hand, you have the Mount Kailash proper, this alleged stairway to heaven, in which or above which the gods dwell. This is the site of pilgrimage. This is a holy mountain. You don't climb it. You don't tread upon it. You merely go to it and observe it. This is a level of reverence that has not been retained throughout the world and throughout these various holy mountains. So many of them have been tread upon. So many have been denied their sacredness and denied their mystery so that people can explore and expel these otherwise sacred motifs. But you see, there's something here that the modern mentality misses. There's something here that we lose. To leave it alone, to let it be a mystery, and to let it embody the mysterious and all of the effects that come from the unknown. This holy mountain left alone to be just that. Not something to be explored, not something to be figured out, but allowed to be untouched. Intentionally left untouched. To defend that sacredness, continuously defend that sacredness from this aspect of the world. Of course, we can't say how long this mountain has been holy. It's not just holy to the Buddhists and the Hindus, it's also to Jainism and to Bon shamanism. This goes well beyond historical marker. But in this example, we see a little bit of everything. We see that Mount Olympus nod, where the gods are. We see the center of the world. We see where the world was created from, this Mount Meru reference. We see its animistic lineage. We see its holiness, its sacred stairway to heaven reference. In this way, Mount Kailash is the most iconic of all holy mountains. So when it comes to major world religions, we've touched on the big ones. Mount Sinai, Mount Kailash, and then the more mythic Mount Olympus. So with that said, and with all of this touched on, let's tend to some mutual themes and get a more rounded picture of the holy mountain and axis mundi trope. Especially in Eurasia, the axis mundi, or the world pillar, has to hold up the firmament. This is the ancient idea that the sky needs to be held up because space is an ocean and it will come in and flood everything if there isn't a barrier between the heavens and the earth. And so then the mountain must uphold this barrier, whether we believe it was crystal or jasper. This is the ancient mind. So then the height of the mountain is especially notable. It not only brings about a wonderment and an awe, but it also serves a crucial function. That which dwells higher than us, can see more than us, and is wisdom accordingly. If someone is wise, they can see the bigger picture more readily than those who are lost on the ground, per se. You can see the forest from the trees, per se. The central axis then is a unifying structure. It connects the lower and the upper worlds. The heaven and the earth meet at the height of this mountain. We believe the heavens to be that of the divine, that of the spiritual. So thus, the mountain serves as this bridge between us, and we have to labor to even begin to climb its majesty. So then, if I am to seek some sort of divinity, then I need to get closer to that divinity, but also away from the world, away from people, away from cities and culture, and back to nature, nature as it is divine. So, in this seclusion and amidst the real world, I might have revelations. A clarity might come to me that only this mountain might solicit, the view of this mountain might solicit. The gods, or the ruling aspect of this world, if we anthropomorphize them, would certainly need a podium to overlook the world from. And this is very much like a throne. A throne sits above all the subjects. And thus the gods sit above mankind. We are subject to the machinations and the circumstances of the world. Thus the throne, and thus the mountain. Here also are notable places of worship. As we move from animism into more pagan or polytheistic tendencies, this is where shrines are built. This is where monasteries eventually pop up. This is where cathedrals are built, so forth. Whether these are grounds for ceremonious occasion or monastic rites, they all share this previous association with divinity and mountains. The sacred gardens, the earthly paradises, are often associated with the mountains as they are left untouched. They are untenable. They are not easily subjugated by mankind's will. They are often the most thick, the most rutted, the most populated by beasts and wayward spirits. And in that mystery of what it is, we can observe all kinds of things. For instance, where do the rivers originate? Where does all this water that brings us life come from? It comes from these mountains. But also the vision of these mountains in the distance give our culture and identity. This is a part of us. This is a part of our lives, and this is a part of our atmosphere, our beingness. If the water comes from the mountains, we are perpetuated by what the mountain gives. Our identity is tied to our environments. We understand this. We've come to forget this now, but we understood this. And so then, this mountain is us. It is an extension of us, and thus our identity. As living people, we live in the shadow of this great mountain. And only the hermits, or those who are most wise, or even those who are most desperate, poets and mystics alike, go on these pilgrimages to seek that which comes from this mountain. But not just in the material sense, certainly not just that, the spiritual sense, this inner outer relationship. The mountain is certainly not just a material phenomena. It is an allegory for our own becoming. And this is where the esoteric comes in. This pillar, this mountain, this world axis, axis mundi, this relationship between the heaven and the earth might just have physiological anatomical ties as well. The iconic picture of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, is this not a display of man's internal axis mundi? The very upper part of the spine, the bone that holds up the skull, is named the Atlas. Atlas as he holds up the heavens, The heavens then is the skull, or Golgotha, or Calvary, the place of the skull. The holy mountain, or this axis mundi, this world pillar, is your spine. And the heavens, or the place of which the spirits or gods dwell, or where decisions are made from thoughts are had, these abstractions are all in your head. As we developed as human beings, the weight lifted from our shoulders and instead were placed on our neck. The weight of our own minds, the weight of the heavens upon the earth, our body, and the abstraction that is our minds. Given this interpretation, our pilgrimage up the holy mountain is an ascendancy beyond material fixations. We are instead moving towards our spiritual maturation, a movement towards higher vantage point or higher wisdoms, a seeking of that greater unknown above the mundanity of the mundus, the axis mundi. This is an earnest part of this story, this holy mountain story, the internal alchemy. This lead goes towards Kundalini. It goes towards the more occult and esoteric fascinations. Because, after all, what is most iconically hermetic or spiritual is this as above, so below, as within, so without, the external as it is evoking our internal journey. More mainstream, or generally speaking, more colloquially speaking, I should say, the holy mountain is this iconic allegory. Life does involve its fair degree of suffering, its drudgerishness, its drudging. What is it all on about? What's the purpose of all this suffering? What's the purpose of all this becoming? Our path to clarity, to vision, to transcending our woes, our bad habits, and so forth. This path is not straight. You can't take the mountain on with a straight path. It's curved, it's winding, it's switchback, and you're going to be tested. You're going to have labors, and this is a path you take alone. And once you get there, this becoming, this holy mountain that you've climbed, you receive that revelation. You receive that vision above it all. This is the seeking that all major religions tout. Revelation, nirvana, moksha, the will to get above it all, to transcend. Across various mythic and religious traditions, one of the most common motifs among them all is the world tree. Whether the Mayan, the Norse, or in Abrahamic religions, we find this reoccurring trope, this tree of life. But what is this exactly? How did all of these cultures come to use this same motif? Throughout these various depictions, we find similar themes. Themes of immortality, this mythic godly quality, and the phrase, the axis mundi. So what wisdom would one glean if they divulged these various mythical and religious tropes? What might we learn then of the Garden of Eden and the Tree of Life and the Tree of Knowledge therein? Given all these voices across the expanse of human history, what is the Tree of Life? Through deduction, we can say with certainty that this initial motif originates or dates furthest back to Siberia. This is the shamanic Tree of Life, as it represents the three different realms: the underworld, the middle world, and the upper world. The tree then, depending on what kind of tree, depends on which culture, of which we'll discuss later, is this unifying or centralizing symbol. Its roots dig into the earth, its trunk is on our level, and it blooms above where we can reach. It also expresses this as above, so below, where the roots of the tree resemble the limbs of the tree. Though deduction tells us that this comes from Siberia, our earliest physical evidence of this is Domuz Tepe in Turkey. If this motif is one in the same, then that means that the physical evidence goes back all the way roughly 9,000 years ago. 9,000 years ago. Whereas if we move forward in time for more concretized examples, then we could look to the Hittites and find it in 3000 BC. We could go even further into the 8th century BC and see it very clearly in the Armenian traditions. So when it comes to the actual evidence, it shows that this motif belongs in Central Asia, if not the Levant, and then extends itself out to the Middle East. But this is just a rough tracing. We can find examples of the Homa tree in Persian paganism prior to any monotheism in the area, but it extends its influence into Zoroastrianism. So in this, it extended all the way back from the animistic into the pagan and then through to the monotheistic. Focusing here briefly, we can see an example of how this works. In the Zoroastrian tradition, the first man and the first woman are brought about by the tree. This is resemblant of the creation story of mankind in Norse mythology as well, each coming from a tree, mankind directly delineating from this, quote, tree of life. Right away, we can start to see a little bit of an allegory here for the family tree. We have this established antagonist as well, which is either a frog or a lizard that seeks to poison or destroy the tree. Where exactly the snake will enter this story is contested. But nonetheless, we already have this establishing motif of the tree and this perceived antagonist. Regardless, by the time we reach the Assyrians, this is already a divine symbol that represents the sacred order of all things. So, in the earliest of civilizations, this is already a mythical trope. Now, I should also add that this isn't always plainly just a tree. Sometimes it's rhubarb, sometimes it's the mythic Homa, but there are tales, several, that give the fruit of this tree plant a elixir of immortality quality. There's a fair number of cultures that have this motif. A tree, a plant with a fruit that gives some degree of immortality. For the Taoist tradition, this was a peach. For the Norse tradition, apples were believed to give immortality. And then, of course, in the book of Genesis, both the tree of life and the tree of knowledge play variant roles in this regard. But we'll tend to that one later. So right away we can see that this is well established across Eurasia, not to mention the Druid tradition and how much reverence it had for trees as well. But what really makes this even more mysterious and intriguing is the fact that this is amidst the Mayan tradition. Well, across the world, the Mayans have this tree of life. And at its base is a water lily monster. Throughout its midst, there are serpents and birds. And this is the reoccurring motif across the world. Most often, there is a bird or an eagle atop and a serpent gnawing at the roots, representing the underworld. The symbolism here is pretty direct. The serpent crawls on its belly. It is of the earth. And the eagle or the bird is that of the sky. So it's very much immediately observable, the different dimensions that the tree is symbolizing here. With the Mayans, this central trunk of the tree is representing the Milky Way. According to the Popol Vuh, there are 4 different trees planted at each cardinal direction of the world. Each of these hold up the heavens And the fifth tree is in the center, and this is the one that connects the lower world to the heavens. So there's one central tree. This is, in comparative religious terms, the axis mundi, the column or the pillar of the earth, that which holds up the center of it all, or the center of the universe. The name for this tree translated is the green tree or the first tree. This is Xibalba, the creative expanse of all variant forms of life, and evokes contemplation on the afterlife and the continuity of life. So this first tree represents a few different things. It represents this cosmic order that we pre-established, this central axis of all the cosmic powers, the balance of it all, as above, so below, and how everything branches out from everything else. But then there's this spiritual growth aspect as well, that of which we aspire towards as we move towards the heavens in our evolution. And then there's life and death. Without getting into the Mayan creation stories or the Mayan afterlife, we can see very plainly how the tree deals with death, how it becomes life for future forest dwellers, how it is a home, both in its corpse and in its life. With such heavy associations and symbolism, it's no accident then that when we look back to the Nordic tradition, that Odin is seeking wisdom from hanging himself on Yggdrasil. His search for wisdom leads him to the tree. And of course it does. As the unification of all living things, as the unification of all realms of being, that is certainly where you'd go to find wisdom. This sacrificial aspect to Odin here is very mythologically implicative. Yggdrasil here is uniquely an ash tree, where when we find this trope throughout the greater European continent, it is most often oak. And in this, I would harbor a guess and say that whichever culture is giving this world tree designation is giving it to their tallest tree, where they live what is the tallest tree. Oak is most certainly associated with the Proto-Indo-European sky father, thus Zeus and thus Jupiter, or Aius Pater. So there is this messy case of the leader of said pantheon or paganism and their association with this world tree. In the case of Yggdrasil, it extends to 9 different realms of being. Not to mention that 9 is a recurring sacred number to the Nordic tradition. 3 times 3 equals 9. There's a lot to discuss here. The variant species that are declared as sacred for various purposes. Apple, yew, alder. There's so much to mention in the way of the history of sacred trees. But if we're just focusing on the world tree here as a motif, then it's Yggdrasil as ash, and this suggestive recursion of the use of oak in this symbolism as it extends out to the Welsh, out to the Druids, out to the Celts, so forth. But the most provoking, in my opinion, is the sycamore tree, or the fig tree, depending. In ancient Egypt, the sycamore was associated with the goddesses Hathor, Isis, and Nut, all very powerful and dignified goddesses in the Egyptian tradition. This life-giving tree, a meeting place for lovers, a number of different mystical and magical associations. The Kikuyu people of Kenya find this sycamore tree to be of the most sacred and associated with their creator deity. And curiously enough, the fruit of the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden is most likely a fig. And the reason that is because, again, the greater association mythologically with this area, for one. But for two, what do Adam and Eve cover themselves with when they are ashamed of their nudity? Well, right there, immediately on hand, it is a fig leaf. Okay, so then it is presumed that this fruit of the tree was in fact a fig, associated with the sycamore tree. The apple serving this function in mythology is an appropriation of Celtic mythology. So that is a later mythological drift, which is confusing because historically the apple was associated with immortality. With its appropriation for this purpose in the biblical Eden story, it's doing the opposite. So you can see the confusion of using this as that device. Coincidentally, the tree that Buddha sits under, the tree of enlightenment, the tree of awakening, the Bodhi tree, is a large fig tree, this Ficus religiosa. So, strangely enough, the Buddha is sitting under another lichened fig tree, as it is very implicatively involved in the Garden of Eden story. So it seems across the Middle East, this was the trope. This was the iconic sacred tree, a fig tree of some kind. Coincidentally, from an academic standpoint at least, the final version of Genesis as we've inherited would have been put around 400 BCE. And again, coincidentally, the story of Buddha's enlightenment is dated around 400 BC. Whether sycamore or Ficus religiosa or the ash tree where Odin is getting his knowledge from, in that case, Odin seems like it's a much more transformative process, much more of a sacrificial process. Odin puts up his life to achieve this wisdom. In a more figurative way, so does the Buddha. And in a more direct way, in the sense that you will die, Adam and Eve eat of the fruit of the tree and open themselves up to death, the knowledge of good and evil. A pervasive attitude towards the trees in Celtic traditions, as it extends up to the Britons, was that the tree represented their ancestry. If somebody came along and cut down this great tree, they believed that their people would be weakened. So in this way, the tree is a vestige of the knowledge of their ancestors. It is their connection to the wisdoms gained throughout their lineage, throughout their family tree. So to eat of the fruit of that tree would be to gain from your ancestry. If this was a ubiquitous attitude across the ancient world, or if this was the initial attitude that was given towards this initiating myth, then it seems by the time we reach the Garden of Eden story, or even by the time that we reach the story of the Buddha, that this might have been already misunderstood in its origin. While this is speculative, if you're wishing to achieve a mystic knowledge, you're not just getting that blindly from the universe. If you're getting it from the tree, as the stories tell, then it's coming from your ancestors. Those who have lived before know of the mystic truths of the universe, and they are handing it over to you in exchange for something. Nothing comes free, after all. Those with the ears to hear shall receive, that sort of thing. This ancestral tie to this knowledge and this familial tie to this tree certainly explains why, in the beginning of this session, we were seeing how mankind was believed to originate from the tree. Stories that tell that the acorns of Yggdrasil are our souls, and the storks pick them up and bring them to our mothers, so that the soul will be implanted in that person, you see. That's also the stork story. The poems about Yggdrasil certainly corroborate this, because what feeds the base of the world tree is the well of Erd, or the well of the word previously mentioned in the course of a number of times. This is also referred to as the well of memory. And it's said that if you betray your past, disrespect your history, then the roots will dry up and the tree will decay. So then there's this crucial aspect to memory, as it is associated with the tree of knowledge, or the tree of life, question mark? After all, who is at the base of this tree? Who is tending to the well of Erd? Well, it's the past, present, and future. It's the Norns. Again, we have that triple motif. The past, the present, and the future. The roots of the tree, the middle of the tree, and the upper parts of the tree. You can see how this isn't just a underworld and heavens and middle world reference. It's also extending out to all triple forms: past, present, future, younger, now, older, so forth. So we might just say that the alleged immortality that comes from this mythic tree might just have something to do with ancestry more than it has to do with actual literal immortality. Before moving on, I want to extend the conversation back out to the aforementioned evergreen tree. As mentioned with the Siberian shamans, where I believe this all originates from, the evergreen tree and its relationship to the Amanita muscaria, the fruit of the tree, is also much later associated with the Persian deity Mithra as it moves into Mithraism, as it is in Rome. This is potentially the reason, or one of the early reasons, why Christianity will eventually pick up the Christmas tree, this evergreen and its association with what will become Christianity, implanted into Roman culture prior to any of the written stories of the New Testament. It's certainly worthy of mentioning that the psychedelic properties of this Amanita muscaria, this fruit of the evergreen tree per se, would certainly bring one to mystic states of being that would be likened to a state of immortality. That is a whole other kind of lead, a potential initial inspiration for all of these more mythical claims. That yet again, the initial inspiration for this immortality motif is more figurative. So this has been a lot of information, so let's do a bit of a refresher to clear this up. If the prognosis that this story began in Siberia a long time ago is correct, then one could surmise the guess that this story was brought through the Bering Strait and eventually found itself in Mayan culture. The deep history of this motif is attested by the architectural finds in Turkey and throughout the Levant. The tree of life, as it is associated with immortality, seems to be the initial inspiration because that is ubiquitous. It extended itself all the way out to China, for instance. However, the tree of knowledge seems to be a later growth from this mythological origin and is mostly associated with the Middle East and the Mediterranean. It seems that when we find this knowledge aspect to the tree in the Druids or in the Nordic tradition, it is much more based in ancestral knowledge than it is in the Middle East. This ancestral knowledge, as it extends to the Druidic rites, for instance, the knowers of the oak is a proposed etymology of the word druid. Regardless of where we are, this motif is more or less the same, but the particularities change. Again, is it oak? Is it Ficus religiosa? So forth. That can change, but the form of the tree and the height of the tree is the unifying physical characteristic. If we're being sincere, there are certain trees that you happen across that bring about their own innate mystique. And this innate mystique is certainly something that we could project into. But there's a reason beyond everything that I've mentioned so far why this tree of life, tree of knowledge motif is even more uncanny than history would tell us. So, this whole time, you might have been thinking about the Kabbalah. What's up with that tree of life? That seems to be a very different kind of reference towards this, a very different kind of inspiration. After all, the Sephirot are realms of being, different facets of the greater mind of the universe, much more abstract, right? And then there are these weird claims that people have tried to make work a few different times how this tree of life Kabbalah is associated with the chakra system. How this chakra system are different realms of being that are all different compositions of the greater mind, sort of thing. It's a bit haphazard, but people have tried pretty hard to make these synchronize with each other. Now, I have to point out the tree of life and the tree's nature, the tree's essence, its fractaling arms, and its resemblance to the nervous system, and the chakra system to the spine. If our nervous system is this tree of life, then it's something that we share with all living creatures. We share this form with the tree. We share this form with all manner of animals. But what is the difference between us and these animals? Well, it would be our brain. Our brain is a different kind of tree, a different sort of fractaling out. And so then this tree of knowledge could be a different tree in the garden, that of which would make us distinctively different, and believe that we would die. The mind as it convinces us of our own mortality. Perhaps then the story of the Garden of Eden isn't so much a story of the individuals that were at the garden partaking in these mythical ancestral events. No, it is in fact a story of our evolution from what is otherwise animal into growing the mind which would make us uniquely mankind. Our mind as it would give us shame, our mind as it would convince us of death, of sin, all this coming along with our minds. If this is the case, then the tree of life is the axis mundi, since our spine, or the world pillar, is what holds up our world, our body, our temples, you see, then its extensions outward would be our nervous system. Then the Sephirot, or the tree of life, the Kabbalah, and or the chakra system are different means of learning about ourselves, of who we are, the age-old know thyself, the wisdom from the tree. Now, I'm not telling you that I'm sold on all this. I'm telling you that this is a distinctive lead. This goes in this direction. The serpent is interpreted then as the brainstem, or the reptilian brain, that of which we ascended out from. If we delineate from animals, then there had to be a distinctive point when we moved beyond that reptilianness. If we take this understanding or this approach or this interpretation and we look back to the Mayan tradition and those initial trees that are in the corners of the world, then this is almost like calling a circle. You call the different directions of the circle, you call up, you call down, and lastly, you call yourself. You are the center of the circle. As you call the directions, you are the final part. You are the final axis mundi. You are the world's pillar. It is distinctively spiritual, it is distinctively hermetic to point out the as above, so below, so within, so without aspect to life. That all of this is an animistic reality. That the tree is resemblant of your body. Your veins resemble the coursing river. Your head is in the clouds. Drifting thoughts come to pass. Dark storms and depressions come over you, so forth. There is much to be discovered in this inner, outer, genuine wisdom of our waking reality and of the human condition. I don't believe this is a subject that can be given or distilled cleanly. I think it can only be teased at. That dust can be kicked up in the air, but you can't necessarily make the vision clear. But it is to say that this is a story that has followed us beyond civilization. It follows us deep into our ancestry. It makes us question a number of ancient wisdoms that we have otherwise closed ourselves off from. Most notably, our ancestry and the wisdom of the ancients. This is certainly something we've closed ourselves off from. Not to say that the wise and the smart people are these distant figures of the past, but that this is our lineage. We are connected to all this. We share the same form as all this. And it also makes us question, what is the nature of our mind? Is that what uniquely and distinctly makes us human? And if so, what is it for? What is its advantage and what is its disservice? The Tree of Life also beckons us to question the recursion of the world, the life and death cycle, to root from the deep below and to reach for the above. The symbolism is quite clear, but all this brings us to a much more animistic and natural orientation than we otherwise would have thought. While the Abrahamic traditions and modern religions will give you earnest wisdom when it comes to this subject, this does ultimately beckon back to the animistic wisdom that inspired it all, and it is rooted in ancestry, reincarnation, eternal recursion, and how you are the axis mundi. You are the tree. You are both a delineation from and the ancestor of this family tree.
And trees were long believed to carry the souls of the dead in their rustling leaves.
And no matter what you do or where you go, the mountain always seems to be right there with you.